So tonight, I thought we'd take us on a trip from Rhuaben to Llangollen. So this is the arrival of the railway into Llangollen. Our route tonight, so the line that we are now part of, and it's very strange actually giving this talk in the station here, because normally we're out and about either in the museum if we do one in the town or further afield. So it's very strange to actually do one on the station. So where we are today is marked, obviously, here in Llangollen. And this is touchscreen. So, new technology. I could do 1950s. I can't do modern stuff. So, what we're basically looking at is sort of from Rhuaben, the line came to here, carried on to Corwin, onto Bala, onto Dolgellau, and then finally end up in Barmouth on the coast. And the line, whilst it looks like it's been planned and been sort of done in one go, it was actually a series of different railway companies that sort of built the line in stages ever westwards towards the coast. So we'll sort of have a look at the first part, which is going to be Rhuaben to Llangollen, this top end tonight, okay? So going back to about the 1800s, in Llangollen, the town was not really somewhere you'd want to visit. It certainly wouldn't be one that would be appearing in tourist brochures. In 1798 and 1801, Reverend William Bingley sort of wrote about the town. As I mentioned, I wandered into the dirty, ill-built and disagreeable town of Llangollen. The streets are narrow and all the houses are built of the dark, shaly stone so common in North Wales. The situation of this place is, however, truly delightful to the admirer of nature. It stands on rocks that overlook the Dee and surrounded by high and bold mountains. So not really the sort of great advertising of the town, it's fairly safe to say. Again, 1827, it's been one long badly paved street and a short cross one, together with some courts and alleys. So not really selling it to the public. So the first changes really that sort of come about here in Llan is the arrival of the canal. And the Ellesmere Canal was originally intended to link Liverpool with Bristol via the River Severn. And the engineer William Jessup came along in 1805 and completed the section from Chirk to the rest of the canal network around Ellesmere. The connection from Chirk heading back this way through the town in Llangollen behind us towards the Horseshoe Falls starting in 1804. And the whole purpose of this part of the canal was to try and have a water supply into the rest of it. It was a feeder system. It wasn't built to tap into any local industry or anything like that. It was purely to get water for free from the River Dee, flowing naturally into the rest of the canal system. But if you imagine by the time you get to the aqueduct, you've got sort of 120 odd feet gap between canal level and river level. Whereas at the Horseshoe Falls, the two by a weir system feeds in quite naturally. So already by that point, you've got the main canal network being fed from here, heading out in towards England and further afield. It also supplied the water for the canal from 1808. So sort of we're talking 200 years ago. The building of the canal was a major pipeline to get water into the rest of the canal system. The Holyhead Road was absolutely another important transport arrival in the town. In 1800, the Act of Union united Great Britain with Ireland to create the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. The problem was trying to connect London and Ireland, because at that point you can't send an email, you can't really send sort of a quick letter. Your only route really is sort of a lot of toll roads and really rough tracks to try and get from London across to Ireland. And in 1808, the post office came up with trying to find a way of making a direct route to link the two. And they considered a new road. That became the Holyhead Road that we know today. So the Act of Parliament was passed in 1815 for the new road to link London with Dublin via the port of Holyhead. Thomas Telford was chosen as the engineer for the Shrewsbury to Holyhead section. So the whole historic A5 we have today is pretty much the route of this original Holyhead Road for the most part. And as you go along it, you'll see there are sort of mile posts alongside, as that one for Holyhead and Salop, which was Shrewsbury in the old name. to tell you the route, how far you're going. And you find the towns that are developed along the route are about 10 miles apart. And that is because when you're, basically if you're changing horses, it's about every 10 miles if you're taking a stagecoach. That's as far as you want to go before you swap, have a break or swap horses. So it really does, the arrival of the road, more than the canal, in fairness, has a big impact on the town. And it starts to prosper as this stopping point. So you start to have more public houses and inns arriving. I mentioned about this break point every 10 miles or so. You've got here in 1827, post carriages and horses are kept at the Hand and the King's Head. The Hand still being very much with us today, on the other side of the river. So it very much is an up and coming place now. It's not that sort of dirty, disagreeable town it was 20, 30 years ago. But the main reason we're here today is obviously to talk about the railway. That's fair enough. This isn't a canal talk, it's one about the railways. So by 1840, there was railways linking Chester with Birkenhead and with Crewe. They opened in 1840. And the Chester and Holyhead Railway then gained some parliamentary approval in 1844. And that sort of proved to be a catalyst for a lot of other railways being built. So instead of using the A5, cutting through here up to Corwin and then Betsycoed and onwards, this route was going along the North Wales coast, as it does today, through Rhyl and that sort of direction going around the coast. By having that railway, that arterial link by rail from Holyhead into Chester and then down to London, you suddenly start having a lot of traffic starts moving in that direction. The North Wales area, the North East Wales area, is very rich in coal and in limestone and in slate. And it's very mineral deposit rich in that regard. So there was a lot of money to be made by tapping into those resources. So you end up with a railway called the North Wales Mineral Railway, linking Chester and Wrexham in 1844, when the parliamentary approval was gained, with an extension down to Rhuaben. So by 1844, 5.5 miles from here, we had a railhead. That was sort of from Rhuaben heading northwards. And that was open predominantly for mineral traffic, as the name suggested, but there was a passenger service as well. At the same time, you have the Shrewsbury, Oswestry and Chester Junction Railway being formed by having a line coming up from Shrewsbury, heading up towards Chirk. And you basically have the two joining one another in the middle to make the Chester to Shrewsbury line that we have today. There isn't a test at the end of this, I should point out, so you're all right. You can all breathe a sigh of relief, because I appreciate there's a lot of names and dates in this. But I'm just trying to set the background, really. So by 1846, we have a line that links from Chester to Shrewsbury. So it runs across the end of the Dee Valley here. But that is as far as it goes. There's nothing coming into the Dee Valley in this direction. The railway mania that happens in 1845, 1846 spawns a ridiculous number of railways, projects being mooted. All of these wanted financial backing. All these were, asking for shares and things like that, trying to desperately raise money. And they are, just by their very nature, very intriguing ones to look at, because they are very, at best they are complete crackpot ideas, most of them. You end up with the atmospheric London and Holyhead Direct Railway in 1845. The atmospheric system being sort of one that Brunel attempted to use. Basically, you end up with a carriage sat over the top of the tracks, and you have this pipe in the bottom, and you're using a vacuum to move the carriages along. You're not using steam power or anything like that. You're actually generating a vacuum in front of the carriages, and that's what's dragging it forwards. Very much ahead of its time, and really didn't work ultimately with the technology it had available back then. But this would have taken a railway from London to Holyhead via Kidderminster and Bridgnorth, so the present day Severn Valley Railway, up to Shrewsbury, and then along the Vale of Llangollen here, and then up towards Betsycoed and that direction, well, Capel Curig in this instance. Another atmospheric line, the Grand London and Dublin approximation. Approximation was used when they didn't really have a clue where the line was going to go. It's more like a line, dotted line, roughly on a map. And you end up with an awful lot of approximation sort of names at this period, as they were just trying to get your money first and try and build up support for it, but hadn't really worked out where these lines were going to go. But again, this is trying to link, much the same as the A5 and the Holyhead Road was doing, was trying to link London and Holyhead. It wasn't trying to serve Llangollen or Corwin or anything like that. It was really, this was a stopping point. It just happened to be on the route to link London and Holyhead, basically. So we have sort of by 1848, we have Rhuaben linked to Shrewsbury and Chester. We have the this fantastic bridge, this viaduct across the Dee, the Kevin Viaduct, which is 19 arches, 1,508 feet long, 147 feet high. So it really towers over the end of the valley, as it still does today. And it was the mastermind behind the Kevin Viaduct was a Scottish engineer who was initially really more at home underground than he was overground. I'm not going to say Wombling Free because it makes it sound like I'm about to start singing the Wombles, and I'm not going to do it. So we end up, we have a quick look at Llangollen Road Station. So in old railway parlance, if you've got something named a road station, you can guarantee it's nowhere near where you want to be. So if you've got Llangollen Road, you are nowhere near Llangollen. And in this instance, it was about 5.5 miles away. Today, if you go along the A5 back towards Chirk, it's where Dewson's is now, is the old Llangollen Road Station. And that became the railhead really for Llangollen town from the 1848 until about 1862. When I first started giving this presentation, I'd sort of mentioned that there was horses, stagecoaches travelling from Llangollen Road to here, and it was linked by a stagecoach along the line. What it also transpires is the route of the canal was used by canal boats to transport people from the town here, and you can imagine how long that took, sort of to link the town and here. You're probably talking a matter of quite a few hours for the what's 5 miles roughly as the crow flies. But going back right to the start of this talk, where I sort of mentioned about this dirty, disagreeable, ill-built town, by the 1840s, 1850s, that whole narrative has changed. So this is, where are we in 1861. This is Bradshaw's book. We're all probably aware of George Bradshaw from Michael Portillo on the television now. But you've got just the wording they're using, the terminology is so more positive than what was being used last time. It's the finest scenery in North Wales. The drive on the Great Holyhead Road from this station cannot be surpassed for beauty in the kingdom. The Vale of Llangollen is said to equal any of the beauties of the Rhine. Now, bearing in mind, I don't think anybody's going to be reading this has ever been to the Rhine. But it sounds good though, doesn't it? You're never going to compare the two. You can't go on TripAdvisor or have a look on Google and have a look. But they're really cranking up the narrative now, to really try and push the use of the railways to come and visit these areas. So you have Henry Robertson. Henry Robertson, we are sat tonight in the Henry Robertson suite of the station. Who was he? So Henry Robertson was born in Scotland, in Banff, in January 1816, and was the youngest of 8 children. His parents were Scottish through and through, and he always claimed of himself to be a Celt of the Celts. That was the term he used. He was accepted into Aberdeen University, where he graduated with an MA before the age of 20. Bearing in mind, 200 years ago, that was unheard of. At the age of 20, to go from a very poor family, really, to having an MA and being at university was pretty much unheard of. And he found work as a mining engineer. A very, very clever man, and so started off looking into mining because there's an awful lot around Lanarkshire, and would spend most of his early years in employment underground. He would often say that the only day he would actually see the sunlight was on a Sunday, which was the Sabbath. 6 days a week he was underground, helping digging away the coal deposits. he tried, very much as would have been on The Apprentice today in many respects, he tried to set up his own colliery. But at the age of sort of his early 20s, was thwarted by the local landowners on the grounds that he was far too young. You know, you wouldn't, you know, could you trust this young upstart to run a colliery, you know? So he was sort of constantly being knocked back a little bit. So Robertson became a pupil of two big names in railway engineering. This is to cut a very long story short for the purpose of tonight. But one of those is Robert Stephenson of the Raynald Trials and Rocket, and the other one is Joseph Locke. Locke had been involved with a lot of railway building at the time, including the line over Shap, so going up from Lancaster up over the Pennines to Carlisle. Robertson's job was actually involving with the levelling and setting out of the route over Shap, but he did get involved with a lot of other railways as well in that period. But it was to be his dancing that gave him his big break. And one evening, he was at a party up in Glasgow, he was dancing away to the music of the time, and there's a gentleman in the side of the room said, by the name of Mr. Matheson. And Matheson spotted this gentleman dancing away, and was sort of noted he was particularly nimble on his feet. And they had got a conversation going. And Matheson was a very successful contractor in his time, a railway contractor, and offered him a job pretty much there and then, that evening, to go and help him. So Matheson and Robertson, by going out for a night out almost, ended up with this very successful contracted partnership building up. And at the same time this is going on, we've got one of the Scottish banks was looking to advance considerable sums of money in developing the mineral district of North Wales. So I mentioned earlier there's got all the limestone, you've got slate, you've got coal. If you start to combine those, you get the good basis of, say, an ironworks or steelworks, because there's sort of, you know, if you've got iron ore as well, you've suddenly got all the key ingredients you need. So there was a lot of money to be made from these here hills, as they say in the Wild West, and it was basically sort of, Matheson was looking for somebody to come down to North Wales to try and survey these areas, see, is it worthwhile as putting this money into these mineral deposits and these industries, and can we make a good return on them? Matheson was asked if he could recommend anybody, and having known Robertson, suggested Henry Robertson, he's the guy to come down. So Robertson was dispatched to Brumbo in 1842, so Brumbo being about 10 miles in that direction, sort of just coming off from Wrexham. That resulted in the rebirth of the ironworks there, and sort of got Robertson involved down here. Now, if you've got a steelworks, or an ironworks as it was then, and you are producing a product, you are producing iron in metal form, you need to bring a considerable number of raw materials in, and you've got to get the finished product out. Perfect thing for a railway. And that's sort of what Robertson got involved with the North Wales Mineral Railway, in that you suddenly have this line running from Chester down to Wrexham to Rhuaben. A short spur off that will take you to Brumbo. So it means the product that's being made in the ironworks at Brumbo could be taken straight into Wrexham and into the rest of the network then. And likewise, you can get the raw materials in at the start of the process. So he became quite a key player in the advancement of the North Wales Mineral Railway Company. And it was through a trip into Wrexham, he met Thomas Brassey, and ended up sort of meeting Brassey in a railway carriage, leaving Wrexham, heading towards Chester, and they sort of, to cut a very long story short, built up a very lifelong relationship and friendship that resulted in many thousands of miles of railway being built, including the Kevin Viaduct across the valley here. So, it's a whistle-stop tour of many railways, a Scottish gentleman who finds himself down here, and sort of by 1848 you have Llangollen Road Station, but we are still without a railway here. So there's lots going on in sort of at Brumbo, into Wrexham, into Rhuaben, and across the end of the valley. This is a railway desert as far as we're concerned at this point. So Llangollen was still without its connection. So there was, from the opening in 1848 of Llangollen Road Station, there was a lot of talk about connecting the town with the rest of the network. You're only 5.5 miles from it at the end of the day. So various schemes were mooted, plans were prepared, suggestions made. Nothing happened. There was a lot of hot air, ultimately. And the whole railway problem, as it was seen then, became such a sore point amongst the townsfolk here. So 10 years had gone by, 1858, and it was finally decided they were going to have a town meeting. They're going to pull everybody together, the great and the good of the town. Let's sort this out once and for all. We want a railway. We want to be connected in. We've been missed so far. So what do we need to do to try and make get a railway in? And indeed, which route should it take? So I'll just put some of the key figures on here. So we've got Robertson up there on the top right. Who have we got down here at the bottom? We've got Colonel Tottenham. Tottenham ends up being the chairman of the railway heading from here towards Corwin. And Thomas Brassey, who was actually the subject of our first talk by the Thomas Brassey Society, the first one of the series we did in here 2 months ago now. And then Carl Bayer, as was Charles Bayer, as he may well be known to you, of Bayer Peacock, locomotive builders, who lived just up the valley down here. So the public meeting had, I said, the great and the good. This, I'm not going to expect you to remember the names on here. It's just more of a demonstration of who was in here. So you end up with sort of the Colonel Middleton Biddulph of Chirk Castle was chairing the meeting. You have Colonel Tottenham, who showed just, of Berwyn was then. You have various MPs. You have Robert Piercy, of the Chief Engineer of Acrovia's New British Iron Company. You have the local vicar, you have the local brewer, you have the local ministers, the schoolmaster, and Robertson. Very much the great and the good. That's a short list. There is a huge list. But you can sort of imagine that anyone who was anybody in the area at the time was in the meeting in the town hall across the way. So the main one at this stage was, how do you connect Llangollen and the Chester to Shrewsbury line? So we've got, on a map, you've got Rhuaben station here. Actually, this is good. Rhuaben going to Llangollen Road and onwards. So you know when you think, why do you bother with technology? There we go, let's not touch it anymore. You've got the Turnpike Road, which is the A539 today. You have the River Dee, and you have the Holyhead Road, the A5. So you can either go to the north of the river or to the south of the river. It's an east-west valley, so you can either go north or south. Okay. So if you go to the south, you basically follow the A5. And the line would join in at Llangollen Road Station, and just basically follow the A5 all the way in to Llangollen and ends somewhere in the town, wherever that may be. Now, that was supported by the chairman of this meeting, who lived in Chirk Castle, just down here. Dickinson and Whalley, who were the local MPs and also owned a lot of the land on the route. So they were sort of very keen to have a railway serving their patch, as it were. There were some concerns about having a junction so close to the viaduct at Kevin, because you're basically going to come straight off the viaduct and have a junction there. But it was be a much shorter route. It was the same route, for example, the A5 has followed. So actually, there's already a precursor to this in that the main road's gone that way. But for the pier, the key bit is that it wouldn't touch any mineral traffic and wouldn't touch any coal. And when we're looking back in the 1840s, 1850s, coal and minerals was what pays. It's not the passenger traffic, it's actually the mineral traffic that is the bit that's actually going to make you some money as a railway company. So there's a big flaw in this one. Going towards the north, there's a lot more supporters for this one. You end up with Robertson. Robert Piercy, strangely, who's got an ironworks in Acrovia that's on the route of this, is very supportive of the idea. You have William Henry Darby of Brumbo. You've got Captain Burkeson, who's representing Sir Watkin Williams-Wynne, who lives in Rhuaben. There's a little bit of vested interest going on here, isn't there? It's not a particularly sort of unbiased motive to this. But the key bits is, whilst it would be a longer route, it does actually tap into a lot more of the coal reserves, the mineral reserves of the time. So you've got the ironworks at Plaskinniston, you've got the New British Iron Company in Akravaya, you have coal mines around Akravaya. It serves a lot larger population because there's more people living on that part of the valley, and it enables extensions going towards Corwin. Because at this point we're just linking here to the main line. There's no railway in that direction. It would stop here. But if you ever wanted to extend westwards, which we all know today happened because we've just run trains on it today, then the route along the north part of the valley would actually enable you to carry on further westwards towards Corwin in that direction. So, unsurprisingly, we went north. We took the northern route, and in December 1858, the Vale of Llangollen Railway Company was officially formed, with a capital of £45,000. The just over 5 miles of line was going to cost about £9,000 a mile. I don't know what HS2's current prices are, but I suspect it's slightly more than £9,000 a mile. It would serve Rabban, Akravaya, Trevor and Sunbank before arriving here in Llangollen. So it received royal assent. It had to go through Parliament, and it was, as all railways did at the time, and it received royal assent in August 1859, which meant that they actually start putting boots on the ground and sort of start digging and making the railway. The first stage of that is a ceremonial cutting of the first sod, which is on the 1st of September 1859. And it's the wife of Colonel Tottenham, the chairman of the new railway, who puts the spade in the ground to say we are now starting work on it. And you've already got some quite large problems as soon as you leave the line at Rabban, the Chester to Shrewsbury line at Rabban. As soon as you leave to come into the Dee Valley, you are hit with a wall of sandstone. And he said, I'm not going to touch it. But the wall of sandstone that you had to be cut through just to get it into Akravaya and head this way along the valley. And all that had to be cut out by hand. And we'll sort of have a look at that a little bit later on. But you can sort of see the scale of the obstacle, really, that was being faced. So the railway's contractors were a gentleman called Brassey and Field, Brassey being Thomas Brassey. Field was actually involved with building the Severn Valley Railway, for example, between Kidderminster and Bridgnorth. And they promised that the line to Llangollen would be completed by May 1861. That was the deadline. They started in September of 1859, and roughly 2 years would take us to build the 5 miles of railway to here. Nice and straightforward. December of 1860 was, for Wales, uncommonly wet. I don't know what uncommonly wet means, but we are enjoying a bit of a lack of rain at this point, but I imagine it was very, very wet and slowed the progress right down. So it became a mud bath on the work sites right along the line. The following January saw work again at a standstill because of severe frost and heavy snow. So the wrong sort of water on this occasion. And yet, despite all of these obstacles, and you've got teams of labourers digging away to try and make the permanent way and the embankments and cuttings, the biggest challenge in all this was finance. It was the complete lack of finance that was being pumped in. It was not keeping up with the progress being made on the project. So, but it took until December of 1862 to link the two. The town with the 5 miles away to Rabban, but that was still in for goods trains to run. It took until June of 1862 to open the passenger service. So slightly later than the 1st of May 1861 they were mooting, we are now 13 months later. And again, the line doesn't run to here where we're sat tonight. It runs to the Vicarage terminus, which is a temporary station on the outskirts of town, about a quarter of a mile in that direction. So very much a sort of a ramshackle sort of timber waiting shelter and wooden platform. But it meant that having a railway coming into Llangollen, you could then extend westwards. The Llangollen and Corwin Railway, formed in 1859, received royal assent the following year and enabled the line to be continued from the temporary terminus that we had at the vicarage through here, and then on, as we do today, on through Berwyn, Glyndwfri, Carrog, and on to Corwin. In 1865, the new station here opened. So we are now 160 years we've had a station here. As it was the 8th of May, we're very close to being the original day. 160 years of having the station here. It wasn't actually ready when it opened on the 8th of May 1865. They were still finishing the walls, so we think it's somewhere over the summer it was actually formally opened. But they sort of started running trains first, but the station wasn't ready. They were still sort of decorating inside the walls and that sort of thing. But the line, by its very nature now, sort of goes along the river, as it does today. And the first obstacle you come across is the medieval bridge. So you've got a ancient bridge that goes across the river. And if you try and put the railway in, you'll find that sort of the trains wouldn't fit under the end arch. If you lower the track level down, you have more risk of flooding. If you lift it up to where you want it to be, you've not got enough headroom for the trains to go through. So the Victorian engineers decided to raise the whole bridge. And you can still see this. If you have a look on your way out later on, you can still see where it's been lifted up. There's now a wedge shape. You can see sort of there, going across, there is a wedge. And that's just to get it to rise up enough to get it over the top of the railway at this end. So a new arch was added in for the railway. But the whole bridge was raised up in a very similar fashion. But you can see the join, so 160 years on. There's a better view. This is 1880, and can you see the change in stone? The lighter colour at the top and the original bridge at the bottom. You can see where that wedge was put in, can't you? The station by this point was really one platform. There was ash fill through the tracks, and then on the far side there was no platform, really. It's a very sort of simple affair, and apart from the very grand tower on the end of the bridge that was added on, a bit of artistic flair, and actually became a cafe in its later years. This is 1895, so this is sort of 30 years after the station had opened here. And you'll notice the bit that's missing is the whacking great big footbridge that we've got today. It's not in. They're quite short platforms. You are, we're on four coach trains, a little sort of tank engine. Quite a small station, but the buildings were designed in this grand sort of hunting lodge style. They were very much sort of blend in the whole Llangollen and Corwin Railway buildings, and we'll look at this a bit more in the next talk. But they're all in this grand hunting lodge sort of style. And you can see sort of where the footbridge is today and where we're sat, somewhere in the roof up here, would have been a large arch space. This floor wasn't in originally when the station opened. It was a large sort of banqueting hall entrance. And that was added on about 2 years after this. So by 1905, the station had been extended. There's new buildings gone in, as you can see. So the platforms would have ended here previously on the sort of in the 1895 image. And at that point, this huge change in the station reflects a lot of investment by the railway company. The Great Western Railway, from 1897 to about 1900, doubled the line from Rwabon to Llangollen, so put double track in rather than single track, upgraded a lot of the stations along the route, and also sort of put in the new footbridge and the new platforms, the extension of the platforms, to cope with the amount of traffic that's been coming through the station. So it meant in this room that the footbridge was added in that direction. You have a new covered walkway here. On either side, you would still look down into the booking office, below the booking hall underneath you. But you'd have basically, so the great and the good would come through here, and they send their servants downstairs to go and buy tickets, and you carry on towards the platform to go on the train. In terms of advertising, the Wirral Railway is doing very well for itself already by this point. They're already advertising what you can do on the Wirral. There's some excellent ones along the history of the line here, in that you have sort of the Caledonian Railway. There's advertising boards at Bala. You were being advised in the 1910s, 1920s to winter in the West Indies from Bala. Can you imagine how many people I think took them up on that ticketing option there? It's remarkable. But they tried, absolutely had to try. The bridge, though, whilst it's been part of our heritage story for many, many years, when it was built, was actually really not liked by some in the town. By 1898, work had been underway, and it meant that basically by having a standard footbridge here, you couldn't have it coming down onto the platform. There wasn't enough width. So the bridge at the far end is cantilevered over the river to accommodate the width of the platform you'd need and the space you'd need for a footbridge. So it is, as you can see, cantilevered over the river. If you go down the steps, you can look down and see the water. It didn't go down well with some in the town. In the 12th of May 1898, there's a report in the local paper describing sort of how ugly the bridge is, and really was it conceived to convey cattle to auction over the bridge, not passengers. And at this point, there'd been a lot of money spent on upgrading the other side of the river, so all the riverside walk, the promenade, you can still do. That had all been upgraded. But on this side, it was sort of, what on earth is the railway company doing? This looks awful. It's an eyesore. 150 years on, still very much part of our history, and we absolutely wouldn't want it to be gone. So this is 1905 looking back, sort of the excursion platform building, so that's sort of rather unchanged today. And that's 2022, so very similar in its view. So that's our toilet block on this side, the office block on the far side, and we're sat just further up in the main building. So that's sort of a whistle-stop tour on the history of building the line from Raben to here. And I've bombarded with dates and people and names of companies. I thought for the second half it'd be good to actually travel down the line in steam days and actually see what it looked like. So, tickets. If you'd all like a ticket, we've got little souvenir ones for you at the end of the talk. If you're watching this online afterwards, then tough, I'm sorry you're not having one. It's the people who came tonight that are going to have them instead. So there's little tickets for you all at the end, and you can sort of take one of those away with you if you so wish. I've checked the numbers, so if they end up on eBay later on, we'll know. All right. So, if you're going to take a journey by train, in the 1860s, this was very much a new thing to do, and was seen as a scary thing. It'd be the same as asking one of you to go on a space shuttle today. You'd be a little bit apprehensive, I would imagine. So, in order to calm your nerves and sort of explain the new technology, the Victorians came up with a handy book on how to travel by rail. And this gave various tips on how to interact with booking clerks, for example, downstairs, and sort of where to store your ticket so you don't lose it. So, for example, if you were asking for a ticket, you'd simply say, Bath, first class, return, or whatever it may be. Keep it simple. Don't be sort of go waffling on about, oh, I'd really like a return ticket to blah, 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 blah. Just keep it simple because they probably won't hear you. Likewise, once you've got your ticket and you've managed to acquire one, that is the only proof that you've paid to travel on the train. You've not got a card receipt or anything like that as you would do today. You've not got a ticket on your phone. You've just got a piece of card. So it's recommended that you should keep it safe in a pocket book, for example. So keep it tucked away inside of a book in your pocket, or in the inside of your left-hand glove, because your right-hand glove will be the one that you probably take off first. So your left-hand one is more likely to be undisturbed during the journey. The worst place is inside of a pocket, because if you come to take your watch out, you'll pull your ticket out at the same time. You'll lose it. And then you haven't got proof you've paid to travel, so you need to buy another ticket. So there were some really handy tips. If you came here in the 1890s, you'd find one of our station masters was a gentleman called Mr. Marwood. And he was very, very good at wordplay. To the extent of there's a couple of interactions recorded. You have a passenger, for example, on one occasion said, "Can you give me an idea of the fare to Torquay?" To which Mr. Marwood said, Did you say idea? Would you rather know the exact fare, for example? Can you tell me the time of the next train to Chester? 4:50, madam, would come the reply. Is there not one before that? Not before the next, madam. Can you give me the time of a through train to Birmingham, please? 12:16, madam, would come the response. And where do I change? Change what? Where do I change? I thought you said a through train, madam. So you have to be very careful, even with all your knowledge that you gain from your books and sort of what you'd learned, you come down here and you get stung, basically, by a sharp-tongued station master. So you have to be very, very careful. So, we are going to do, if this does it, excellent, Rhuaben, Acrevia, Trevor, Sunbank, and on to Llangollen. That's the bit we're going to do tonight. So we start off in Rhuaben. It's a very grand junction station, opened in 1862 at the start of the Vale of Llangollen Railway. And its later years, by 1964, proudly said it's junction for Llangollen, Bala, Barmouth and Pwllheli. So this was the main junction station for the Cambrian coast, really. So you had a rather large enamel on one side. On the opposite side, it just told you that was the change here for services to Chester and Shrewsbury and that sort of thing. So the station itself was rather grand for its time. You had sort of two through lines. One was the one that the man has sat on at the moment is the line heading northwards towards Wrexham and Chester, and the line on the right hand side is the one heading towards Shrewsbury. It's a double track right the way through. But on the far side, on the left hand side of this image, you find there's a bay platform, which again is where a lot of the services for this line would have started. Would then sort of migrated to be sort of Wrexham being the main starting point. But the bay platform was very much in use. You have a grand sort of wooden goods shed on one side, and you have a covered footbridge over the top. This is 5th of March 1967. This is the end of steam on the Chester and Birkenhead to London route. It's one of the specials they put on. But again, a rather large station for its time. This is June 1957, and this is sat in the bay platform. So the bit I'd like to zoom in on is the refreshment room, because the station, by about the turn of the 1900s, had about 100 people working on site. So that'd be in the goods yard or on the station, in refreshments, allocated to wagon checking, all that sort of thing. There's probably about 100 people booked on. If you go there today, it's 2 bus shelters and there's nobody who works there. So it just sort of shows how things have changed. But being a main junction station, you had a refreshment room. So you end up with, you could go in there and have a basket provided for you. You have a luncheon basket. And there'd be adverts on all the carriages, giving you a list of all of the cold luncheon and tea baskets available. And there we are, rubbing down the bottom. So you're on it. That is a surviving plaque that's in our house at the moment that would have been on one of these wicker baskets that you'd had your luncheon in. You had your lunch in. So you very much sort of, you could pick up your grab and go, if you want to put it that way, ready for your journey towards the coast or heading north or south. Looking southwards, a lot of these photographs are taken in the 1960s, are either on one day in April or one day in September each year. The April ones and the September ones correlate with when the Festiniog and Darlington Railway Preservation Society specials were being run. So you'll find there's a lot of photographs of the line in steam days are either done on one day in April or one day in September each year. You'll see that as you go through some of these. But this is the line coming in into Rhuaben from the south. And you have a turntable on the right-hand side for turning locomotives. The sidings on this side are mainly for the coal traffic. You've got a lot of collieries in the area and that sort of thing. And then Rhuaben middle box in the background. This is September 1964, the Darlington Railway Preservation Society special. Note the fashion of the time, absolutely. They're striding rather nonchalantly straight off the end of the Barrow crossing to go and take some photographs of the loco. Trespassing is very rife in these times. Please don't do it here, when you're visiting us when we've got trains running, or indeed any other time of the year. Don't trespass. I'm going to have that on camera. Don't trespass. So the Darlington Railway special headboard is on. And this is made up, this is the last train that ran through from the last AGM special at least, that ran through from Rhuaben to Barmouth. Because 3 months after this, the line was washed away in certain sections. The night of the 12th of December 1964, the line was washed away between Corwin and Bala, to a place called Llanderfel. But the platforms here were flooded, and there was various other places that suffered a lot of damage. So the line was due to close at the middle of January 1965 as a through route. The last 4 weeks of its life was actually had a rail replacement bus from here to Bala because the line had been breached. There was no point repairing it for the sake of a few more weeks travel on the line. So if you wanted to do a through journey, you'd come in by train to here, you'd be a bus to Bala, and then you'd join another train there to carry on to Barmouth on the coast. So this was the last AGM special that actually ran the whole length of the line in order to get on this occasion to Towyn on the coast. So you had Little Man on the front and 4555, which has already been preserved at this point on the train behind. This is taken from Rhuaben middle box with the turntable just about in the background. It's a particularly murky day, and there's a lot more photographs taken for the September Darlington special in 1964 than there was on the Festiniog one in the April. So I've tried to put a few more of the September ones in because there's a lot more blue sky and a lot nicer days. So on these tucks, as we go through exploring the line ever westwards, you'll probably see a lot more of the Darlington ones for that reason. The box at Rhuaben Middle has gone, but the box plate is just on the wall outside of here. So if you do want to have a look at it, it's just on the wall outside. And again, it's far better on the wall here than it is on our floor at home. So it's here now for all to see. Heading southwards from Rhuaben, we're still on the Chester to Shrewsbury line, and you have a up and down loop just for the traffic. There's also a spur right in the background here coming off to serve the collieries. So this is 1967, so this is after the line closed, but just to give you an idea of sort of the amount of infrastructure that's going on still by the late 60s. And this really is taken off the bridge at Llangollen Line Junction. So the view the other way, if we turn over and look at the other parapet, you'll see the two lines going off towards Shrewsbury and the two lines in the background heading off towards here in Llangollen. This is April 1964. This is the Festiniog special coming in, slightly brighter, but not majorly. This is Pendennis Castle, if memory serves me correct. September 63, you have a bit of a foreign loco in these parts, in that you have a bullied, you have fighter command work the train with a rake of bullied coaches. So unheard of really to have all green stock in the valley here, but it absolutely happened. The bullied, by all accounts, struggled to get out of Shrewsbury and had to have a banker on it to try, because it was just not getting its feet down. So, and was running roughly about an hour late by the time we got into Rhuaben. It was seriously struggling, but by the time it got round to Towyn, they were back on time because they put 2 manors on. So this is Lyddham and Foxcote Manor, taking the service from Rhuaben along this line all the way towards Barmouth Junction, more for Maudac as it was then, and then heading southwards along the coast. But if you look on our all the line side mileposts down here, on our line, there's one on the platform, which is 5.5. They're all recorded from Llangollen Line Junction. And they're all recorded from that post there. It's not there today. So we are recording 5.5 miles from a point that no longer exists and 5.5 miles from a line that you can no longer travel down. But it's a key reminder here that we were once part of a much larger network. So that post is where all of our mileage is taken from on the line. This is April 1964. This is the AGM special coming up, and as soon as the line left the Chester to Shrewsbury Metals, has a bit of a climb coming up, as you can probably see. So this is the train coming up. This is 75009, 75023, which were pretty much actually the standard locos for the line by this point. The Manners were really long since gone, and it would be our standard locos in the last couple of years of the railway's life. I'm going to show one of these slides one of these days, and one of our volunteers is going to say, "That's me at that window," and I'm going to believe him as well. So we end up sort of with the line disappearing off in the background towards Akravaya. So at this point, I was thinking you probably don't really know where we are. I sort of sometimes lose track of where we are on the line. So I've included underneath, this is the 1907 Great Western Railway survey of the line. So we've just left Llangollen Line Junction here. And so that bridge in the background is just here. So you can see where the two lines used to split, but there's now a school and the whole housing development on the right-hand side of that bridge. So the line has pretty much been obliterated for the first, say, half a mile, something like that. If we carry on a bit further around, we get to this rather large sandstone cutting that we looked at earlier. And this was the Coed Richard footbridge area. So across that cutting, you have a wooden footbridge also. And we have the original drawings for that still, and it's still standing today. It's a nice metal structure today. But we have the original drawing of it still in the archives at home. And it was quite a spindly affair, as you can probably imagine. But if you walk across it today, there's just woods either side, deep in the cutting. But it's interesting to sort of note on these as well, when they were digging out all this sandstone, it's great building material. So not only were they using it on the bridges and buildings on the line, we've never sort of tried to trace it, but I'd imagine parts of the building here probably came from out of that cutting. But it was also being sold off as a good building product as well. So sort of a lot of the sandstone from the Akravaya sandstone cuttings ended up building parts of the rest of the line and being sold off to pay for it as well. So you go through Akravaya, and that was sort of probably the most unscenic station on the line. I think that's put nicely. It was built to serve the local industry, and sort of there's an ironworks right next to it and steelworks. And sort of was a rather sort of very industrial setting, really. But this is 1924 with the double track going through and a couple of sidings. And you also have a low-level station or low-level line that cuts through, which is the Ponkasotli branch that runs through underneath, serving the local industry. So there's a lot of industry going on in this area. But I sort of didn't want to bore you with photographs of it, if I'm brutally honest. So we sort of make a note and sort of move on from there. So Akravaya to Trevor. This is one of the Tallyclin specials coming around the bend in 1962, if memory serves. And we make our way towards Trevor. And Trevor we see in colour. This is July 1965. This is after the line had closed, but they put on a brake van special called the Flintstone Special. It was the Railway Enthusiast Club from Farnborough who chartered a series of about 7 brake vans, I think, from memory, and sort of with a pannier tank toured around a lot of the lines of North East Wales, including the line as far as here and Goods Junction and on to Pentreveli. So this is it in the yard after the station had closed, and taking water before they go and explore further along the line. By August 1966, we still had steam on the line, and it was the goods traffic. So whilst the passenger service had finished in January 65, we were still having goods services. And there was the Shooter, which was the local pickup goods service, still running. And this is it in August 66. The signal box is looking rather worse for wear, but would still come and pick up a few wagons and that sort of thing along the line as it went. If we head sort of westwards, and this part is still very prominent today. If you drive along the A539, you'll see there's a raised embankment alongside the road. That's the A539 in the background. And this is looking towards Trevor and Llangollen behind us. And this was a very early image I got from April 1964. And one of the first ones when I started collecting these, the first one I had, I thought, that's a nice one. I'm never going to get anything better than that for this part of the line. And then as you keep going, you find that actually that picture was taken around the corner here. And another photographer had perched himself on the line side, had photographed it pretty much from near to the bridge. And that's it heading off under Bryn Howell Bridge, heading off towards where the canal and the river cross over each other. Looking down from that bridge into the cutting, this is June 1965, this is again the pick-up goods service. You can see how wide those cuttings were. And the purpose of this was actually to sort of acquire spoil to build the embankments further down the line. So rather than just having a very narrow sort of cutting, which it probably shouldn't have been, they made it a very wide one, because the hill, you can see where it's been cut out. All that spoil has been used further down to making the embankments heading this way. So very much sort of a cut and fill exercise on the line. This is 1967. This is the Wrexham Malden Connors Quay Rail Tour. This is the last passenger service to run down the line, and it came as far as here and Goods Junction as an enthusiast special. It was hauled by an 8F, and this is a view sort of looking back towards Bryn Howell, and that bridge is just in the background here. Sunbank, again taken from the 8F special. Sunbank had a halt very briefly. It wasn't a very successful one, to be fair, and certainly by the 1960s there was no trace of it, but it would have been a sort of a halt in this location, either side with a pagoda on each side. Castle Dean's Bran in the background for reference, which is behind us. If you knock that wall through, you'll be able to see it. This is basically where the speed camera is on the A539 now, where the Son Trevor is. If you go on the bus, you'll come along the road here. You've got the road, you've got the canal, and then just behind these trees, you've got the site of Sunbank Halt on the railway there, but at a lower level. And that turned out to be a major flaw in the railway's story. Because in September 1945, there was an accident, there was a washout. The canal burst its banks, the water flowing as it does downhill towards the River Dee, took out the embankment of the railway. So from the canal, went straight through under the track, heading towards the meadow and the river. That removed all the embankment, but didn't remove the track or the signalling wires. So it meant that on the morning of the 7th of September 1945, whilst there was reports of the water level being scarily low further downstream, heading towards Monsanto's works in Acrovia, the line itself, because the signalmen could still communicate with one another. So they didn't think anything was wrong. So in the dark of night, they'd had no reason to suspect there was a breach of the line. So they let the 3:15 AM Chester to Barmouth mail train through. As you'd expect, they could communicate with one another. And sadly, that went into the breach where the track was still there, but obviously there was nothing to support it, and ended up sort of having a rather large mess at the bottom of the bank. The driver lost his life. The guard and the fireman had a very lucky escape. The fireman, remember, was flung clear, and the guard remembers waking up and seeing his towed brake van was pointing straight upright, and he could see the bent rail and basically sort of mangled mess above him, and it was just enough for him to climb up to escape from the wreckage. We're lucky it was a mail train rather than a sort of a passenger service, so there'd be a lot more fatalities. But in true railway fashion, they had to go and then protect the line. So one headed towards Trevor signal box and one came here to Llangollen signal box. And both of them were rather surprised when they turned up, sort of, in this complete state. So someone explained what had gone on. It was a complete shock to everybody, and that's what anyone really first knew about it. But being September 1945, we're still in the Second World War, so it wasn't a lot of publicity about this, as you can imagine. There was also a lot of, supposedly a lot of money on this train, of old banknotes that were all collected by the Royal Mail and by the Post Office, of course, in the official line, but I suspect there's probably some went walkabout. But hey ho. The breach is here. This is 1967, looking over the river. You've got the Sun Trevor pub in the background. The breach, you can clearly see where it was. And so it's not a very good photograph in terms of the sharpness of the 8F rail tour, but actually shows that breach, you know, fantastically well after it'd been repaired. I don't think with the overgrowth now you can actually see where it was today, but if you'd like to go hunting, then please do. We sort of returned 48697, the loco off the rail tour, in part, I admit, to the line in 2023, because I own the smokebox number plate off it, so we thought let's bring it back and put it back on the line. So it did, and it had a bit of a tour from Llangollen along the line, and this is just on the outskirts of town, looking along the trackbed. So in part it returned, I suppose. Oops. So as it came into Llangollen, it runs right alongside the river. This is now where the Riverside Gardens are, the other side of the main road bridge. You notice sort of the curvature of the track requiring a check rail. There's that sort of sharp coming round. With the weir still in place and the Hand Hotel we mentioned right at the start in the background. Just an interesting view from August 1964. Taken looking across the river towards the railway, and I suspect if you took it today it wouldn't be that far different, to be honest. I include that just for interest as we're here in the town more than anything else, but I'll say it's very, very little change in the past 60 years in that regard. This is coming into the station. By this point, the logical thing would have been for the train to have stopped in the station. In 1967, BR had closed the line and were very keen to try and get rid of it, and didn't want anything stopping in the station to try and promote further use of it. Particularly when 2 months or so just after this, you'd have the International Eisteddfod, the music festival in the town, which the organisers of that were crying out to BR to have trains stop in the station as specials for the Eisteddfod. So in April 1967, when the enthusiasts came through, they had to pass straight through the station and stop at Goods Junction just beyond. They weren't allowed to stop. This is in happier times in 1963. Again, probably very little change, to be fair, today. If we keep on going as we are, there's probably a bit more paint needed, but we're getting closer to it. This is July 1964. During the Eisteddfod, and you notice then that the bridge was still not full width. It was about 4 years after this, it was widened again. But that was a scene in the middle of summer in 1964, with all the banners and everything else up, and you're just walking right down the middle of the road to try and get through. It was, I say, about 4 years after that, the bridge was widened again to on this side, to accommodate the second pavement on a slightly wider road. And you can still see that today. If you look underneath the bridge now, you can see where it was widened. Coming into the station, so there's the horse landing on the right, the signal box, which was a product of 1897 with the expansion of the station in the middle. The signal is still with us, albeit not here. It's now at Arley. It's now their starting signal at Arley on the Severn Valley, but again, sort of very similar to as it is today, fortunately. And a view the other way, sort of as the train's leaving around about 1963. I suppose the only difference in this one now is a hose reel on this side for loading filling the water tanks on the Mark ones. This is Goods Junction. It's the rail tour again, and this is one taken from probably with getting his feet wet, I suspect, where it is. But you notice an awful lot of people on the line side here. It gets worse. We don't get this during our gala events, thank goodness. And once again, please don't trespass on the railway. But this is sort of, everybody disembarked at Goods Junction and went off to go and capture their photograph. And that was the photographer's gallery, really, in front of the 8F. A few of the people sort of wandered off heading towards Pentrevellin, sort of didn't get too far, but sort of had a bit of an explore before they were called back and had to carry on their rail tour. But you notice the rust on the lines here. There was nothing by this point. There was nothing running beyond Goods Junction, heading towards Berwyn and towards Corwin. So this was just really just the next trains these lines would see would be the demolition trains. Pentrevellin, so where our carriage and wagon workshops are on the up at Pentrevellin today, was originally put in as sidings to accommodate the passenger traffic. So any empty stock that was from here, obviously there's no sidings on the station here, we can put carriages in to get them out of the way. So when you have excursions and rail tours and things like that coming in, where do you put all these carriages? Because we don't have sidings that way, there's a river, and this way there's houses, and sort of you're hemmed in. So Pentrevellin, which is about 3/4 of a mile beyond here, there was enough space to lay out 4 sidings. One of these was connected in for the slate traffic, local slate traffic, and in later years, sort of 1935, they attempted to put a camping coach in there, which is advertised as being in Llangollen. So if you arrived on holiday to go to your camping coach, you were sort of met off the train here and pointed in the direction of the canal and told, keep walking 3/4 of a mile that way, you'll find where you're staying for tonight. You can somehow see the flaw in that one, can't you? You can see why it wasn't quite a huge success. But this was 1965 when the Flintstone Special went down there to go and have an explore. That was another view of it. So we sort of end at Pentrevellin really for this talk. We are trying, on the station, we're trying to tell the story a little bit about who we are and our history over the past 160 years it is now. And one of those is is the new interpretation panels. We've got one on the station now with the detail of the station right way from 1848, Llangollen Road Station, right way through to to its closure and rebirth in small bite-sized chunks, as it were. Everything we're trying to do is now bilingual. So our fares are now bilingual. This is taken last year, so the fares panel has now changed. But the map is, the interpretation panels are. We've now got panels on here about Thomas Brassey, for example, trying to tell the story of Brassey. So whilst we've got a room dedicated to Henry Robertson here, Brassey has for the past 40, 50 years, has been swept under the carpet a little bit. So we thought, well, if he's the main contractor to build the line, and there's a brilliant story to tell there, why don't we tell it on the station, and something he helped build? So that's the story behind Thomas Brassey, is we tell it on the station now. On a pioneering engineering theme, one of the things we've been doing is we've been involved with the Institution of Civil Engineers, and at Berwyn now we had a plaque presented to us in November last year to commemorate Henry Robertson, Charles Bayer of Bayer Peacock, and a gentleman called Richard Roberts. And this, we're not just English and Welsh, because Charles Bayer, or Carl Bayer as he was German. So it's in English, Welsh and German, just to confuse everybody and really challenge us to try and fit it all onto a panel. So we think it's one of the first trilingual interpretation panels to be found, certainly in this part of the world. But going through on the theme, a lot of the posters we now display on the station outside are all on this engineering theme for this year as well. And onwards into this year, 2025, and the 13th of September, so the weekend in the middle of September, will be our 50th anniversary of Llangollen Railway as a preservation centre. So there's big plans being drawn up for that. this is a fantastic one sort of thing. Our first locomotive, in fact, which is Austin number 1, Burton Wood Brewer, as it was, has a capacity of 8,000 pints. So it was sponsored by the brewery, so they were going to measure everything in pints, weren't they? So keep an eye out on the website really for what we're looking at doing over the summer and into September in particular to celebrate our 50th anniversary of Llangollen Railway. And we'll sort of have a look a bit more of that in the next talk. So all it is from me is to say thank you very much for listening. I can have a well-earned breather now, as I was back then. And really sort of our next talk in a month's time will be going from here to Corwin. So looking at the route of the line in steam days and why it came about, and looking at a couple of fatalities, royal visits, accidents and incidents, and even sort of signatures from the First World War from the soldiers. So if you're interested in learning a bit more, please do come along next month. Tickets are available online now. There's some fantastic literature that will help you sleep at night if you want to look down that route. But all it is from me is to say thank you so much for coming along tonight. If you've got any questions, do fire away, and have a safe onward journey. So thank you for listening. Yeah. Anybody got any burning questions? Fire away, sir.
Were there any facilities for servicing locos?
Not here. Corwin there was. There absolutely was at Corwin. So the line really sort of was served by Croesnewith shed in Wrexham. So most of the locomotives and things like that were provided from Wrexham, worked through the line. In the early days as far as Dolgellau, because that became Cambrian metals going on from there. So the Cambrian shed was at Penmanpool. So right behind the George pub in Penmanpool was where their shed used to be, a little 2-road shed. When so until about 1928, there was a shed at Corwin as well. There was a small locomotive shed at Corwin with a water tank and turntable, and that was provided by the LMS principally, then, and was LNWR before that. So there was a couple of places really where you could get locos, but ultimately most of the lines, rolling stock and locos in that sense, came from Wrexham, and that's what it's the line. There was never any sheds here, for example, at Llangollen. It was a goods yard, but there wasn't any need for anything in terms of locos. So yes, hopefully Wrexham, Corwin, Penmanpool, but not here. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a safe onward journey, and thank you for coming along and supporting us. It's really appreciated, so thank you very much.